In an era where reboots and sequels seem to dominate film, TV, and video games, and more often than not seem to bring down the series, it's easy to wonder why some franchises, despite dedicated followings, remain criminally underexplored. Tron is a prime example, and as a kid specifically, Tron Legacy just blew me away. With crazy futuristic Olympic games, girls in skin-tight suits dunking on baddies with light swords, and sci-fi light cycle chases, how could you not love this? Now, the Tron movie and Tron Legacy definitely had their problems, don't get me wrong, but they were great and important movies in their own rights. But despite growing a cult following since their releases, I've always wondered why there hasn't been more media for them over the years. So today I'm going to do my best to answer that question and explore the history of the series through its many highs and lows and see what the future holds. So if that sounds good to you, let's strap into our light cycles and enter the grid to explore whatever happened to Tron. Hi everyone, my name is Otto and welcome to Exits Examined. We'll be exploring the lives of people, products, and more after their prime time has seemingly come to an end. If that sounds good to you, there's a like and subscribe button below. It's crazy to think about, but in the 80s, the world of computers was not really understood by your everyday person, and this makes sense because your average computer of the time took up more space than most apartments. However, things changed with the advent of the golden age of arcades. Suddenly, computers became a part of the public consciousness and cultural zeitgeist of the time, and this is of course where the story of Tron starts. It was in one of these arcades that Steven Lisberger, an animator, first saw Pong and became fascinated with the idea of making a movie incorporating concepts and aesthetics around video games. The only problem was the amount of special effects needed for this, which would be eye-wateringly expensive because nothing like this had ever been done, because these techniques would quite literally need to be pioneered during production. After company after company turned down the idea, Lisberger finally found one crazy enough or desperate enough to make it a reality. Disney was in a bit of an interesting place at the time and was looking for something fresh. Since Walt's death in 1966, the studio had been in decline and was desperately looking for the next big thing. Science fiction seemed like the perfect genre to reignite their spark, especially considering the colossal success of the then recent Star Wars. But it wasn't going to be easy. For the production, Tron blended live action with traditional animation and cutting-edge CGI, and each one of these presented its own set of challenges. Since all special effects were added later in post-production, actors had to perform against black sets, which may not seem bad by today's green screen standards, but this was unheard of at the time. Tron's signature glowing circuitry was a monumental task in itself. The painstaking technique called backlit animation involved creating a negative of each frame and then meticulously hand-painting the areas that were going to glow. Now imagine doing this thousands and thousands of times. And plus, the sheer volume of this work meant that reshoots were practically impossible. It's kind of ironic in a way though that Tron's innovative futuristic setting was made almost entirely using old school techniques by hand. We were the bridge from analog to digital, and that is a unique thing. It was unlike any other movie that had been made, and no movie will ever be made like this again. Now, the thing about Tron is that although it's an extremely important and influential film, it's not in a traditional sense, necessarily good. The plot is nothing to write home about, and due to the unorthodox production, acting and dialogue can feel a bit clunky at times. Kevin Flynn, played by Jeff Bridges, is a talented programmer who, as an aside, might have been inspired by Steve Jobs. But anyway, he sees his game design stolen. Determined to expose the theft, Flynn hacks into the company's mainframe, but instead of finding evidence, he's abducted by the computer's master control program. Digitized and trapped inside the system, Flynn is forced to fight, and he must join forces with other programs and fight back against the MCP's tyranny. But the real star of the show here is the aesthetic. It's just unlike anything ever seen on screen before and since. Tron is this neon fever dream of a world, a fusion of digital grids and glowing lines, bathed in a synthwave palette of blues and teals, accented by fiery reds and yellows. While the scenes remain visually stunning, the film's overall quality does suffer from the pioneering nature. This is all on top of a truly incredible, haunting, and groundbreaking soundtrack by none other than the amazing Wendy Carlos, who would go on to continue to put out banger after banger for the likes of Clockwork Orange and The Shining. Despite its pre-release hype reaching stratospheric levels, Tron fizzled at the box office, landing at a lowly 26th place for the year. Honestly though, I think this might have been more of an issue with timing rather than anything else. It's hard to imagine a tougher year to drop your film in as E.T. and Raiders of the Lost Ark. This box office disappointment, coupled with the criticism of its then groundbreaking computer animation, cemented Tron's status as a Disney black sheep for the next decade. But gradually, appreciation began to emerge for the film, and its impact would be felt for a very long time. Thematically, Tron feels way ahead of its time. It grapples with issues that remain relevant today, like artificial intelligence, digital identity, privacy, data control, and the dominance of big tech and gaming. Tron even attempted to visualize the digital realm itself, which is something that's reminiscent of the metaverse of today, which, by the way, is seeming to be leaning more towards gaming applications than anything else. So, hey, maybe it was inspired by Tron. And this is all on top of how culturally huge this film has been. Pixar itself was heavily inspired by the groundbreaking CGI used during production, and even music was influenced, with the most obvious of course being Daft Punk. Although the film itself didn't perform well, this turned out to be okay because this was the same age as Star Wars, which meant product tie-ins, baby. And the tie-in Tron video game became a runaway success. Even today, you can find these machines humming away in bars, and they did a lot of work to cement the series' longevity. For decades, Steven Lisberger dreamt of revisiting the world, but it wasn't until 2008's San Diego Comic-Con that Disney surprised fans with a teaser for Tron Legacy, then titled TR2N, or Tron 2. It turns out that Tron Legacy would be directed by Joseph Kosinski, who had a pretty incredible vision for the movie, which was grounded in realism. With a degree in architecture, he was incredibly detailed when it came to making the world feel like a real place, and he often used real materials like glass and steel whenever possible. Tron Legacy has breathtaking production design that seamlessly blends realism, futuristic sleekness, and a digital aesthetic. The grid itself is a marvel to look at, and there's this masterful use of contrast, dark environments illuminated by vibrant neon. This minimalistic approach extends to everything within the grid, from the sleek costumes to the iconic light cycles, light discs, and soaring aircrafts. Every design is meticulously crafted to be eye-catching and, above all else, cohesive. As far as the plot, Sam Flynn is haunted by his father's disappearance, and he investigates a message and is transported into the digital world his father created, the grid. Together with his father and Cora, they fight to escape a dangerous grid ruled by an evil program and prevent it from invading the real world. The movie, well, it's got a bit of a mixed reputation, which breaks my heart to say because I think for what it is, it's pretty great. It works as a standalone film, but also as a sequel. Jeff Bridges masterfully reinvents his character, transforming Kevin Flynn from a headstrong hacker into a wise old sage with some truly amazing quotes.
You're messing with my Zen thing, man.
And this is all punctuated by cool callbacks to the original film. And the soundtrack, oh my god, the soundtrack is just perfect, which is no surprise considering it was done by Daft Punk themselves and might be one of the greatest soundtracks of all time. As for criticisms, you'll see some people knock on the acting and chemistry between leads, and literally every single review, video, or article about the film in existence talks about the de-aged Jeff Bridges, which I think might have been one of the first instances instances of this that I'm aware of. But from the bottom of my heart, I don't know how any human can throw any negative comment on a movie that probably ignited thousands of teenage boys' purely academic fascination with black skin-tight outfits. Anyway, in 2010, even before Tron Legacy hit theaters, there were plans for a sequel, with the actors all returning to their roles. However, those plans came to a screeching halt in 2015, most likely due to the disappointing box office performance of Disney's sci-fi film Tomorrowland, which released right before Tron 3 was slated to begin production. But that wasn't the end of Tron, because on 2012, Disney aired Tron Uprising. It was set between the two movies and originally marketed during Tron Legacy's release. The story follows Beck, voiced by Elijah Wood, a young program secretly trained by Tron to become his successor, and it kind of bridges the story of the timeline and even features many of the original characters and a host of really solid new ones. Despite its strong qualities, Uprising remains relatively unknown even among Tron fans, which is a shame because it's pretty good. It absolutely nails the visual and is able to explore the feel and look of the grid in a much more dynamic way due to it being animated. The choreography and animation here is top-notch, and this was a surprisingly big push on Disney's part, but it never got much recognition, and it's just tragically underrated. So what happened here? It was rather suddenly canceled after only 19 episodes, and this is due to a few factors: an undesirable time slot, content that was more appropriate for an older demographic, and Tron Legacy's inability to start a franchise meant that sadly this show was dead on arrival, which is a shame because there are some great themes, cliffhangers, and aesthetics here that honestly just deserve so much more. So although the film and TV side of things haven't really taken off, there's been a good amount of other media in the series, specifically video games. I mean, there was of course a whole slew of these starting from all the way back to the first film. On the arcade front, there was Tron and Discs of Tron, and there was also a number of early console games, including Adventures of Tron, Solar Sailor, and Deadly Discs of Tron, but it did not end there, oh no. Tron 2.0 was released in 2003 and was a first-person shooter of all things, and made by Monolith. It's too bad because it's actually a hugely creative title with a lot of love and care put into it, but doesn't get talked about nearly enough. Released in 2010, Tron Evolution served as the mandatory tie-in video game for Tron Legacy. Developed in Vancouver alongside the film, Evolution offered players backstory and context for the characters. The promotional push was substantial and even featured a real-life light cycle at E3. While the gameplay fell short with its repetitive nature, it's another underappreciated game with some decent gameplay and good story bits. Then we got Tron Runner in 2016, and this is reminiscent of your Temple Runners. While the visuals are impressive, the experience lacks depth. There's not really much of a story here. Thankfully, the core gameplay is solid and really captures the essence of Tron. Most importantly of all, they did a good job with the light cycle portions, but the entire thing feels like it's more appropriate for a free-to-play mobile experience. Now, we have got a game as recently as 2023 with Tron Identity. It's a surprisingly delightful visual novel / puzzle game that stays true to the franchise's visual and soundtrack. The writing is well done and thought-provoking, and the game is honestly gorgeous for what it is. You take on the role of Query, a program basically akin to a private investigator. There are some light puzzle elements in here, but the core gameplay is the conversations. While your choices influence the story, the relatively short playtime, around 2 to 3 hours, kind of limits the branching paths. The game usually avoids presenting clear-cut good versus evil choices and instead focuses on morally ambiguous situations with no easy answers. Now, if the video games aren't enough for you, there's no shortage of comics and books here, including a novelization of the first movie. Some notable mentions here are 2005 Tron: The Ghost in the Machine comic, which continued the story of the game Tron 2.0, and Tron Betrayal, a 2-part comic book miniseries set directly after the first film. So getting back to the timeline, the Tron franchise has had its ups and downs, and you get the feeling that Disney did not know what to do with it because neither movies did really well in the box office, but despite that, they're decently popular. After the sequel to Tron Legacy crashed and burned, the series went on a bit of a hiatus, but that turned out to not be all for the grid. Disney announced that instead of a sequel, there would be a reboot, but then they did an about face and announced in 2020 it would actually be a sequel. So pretty confusing stuff and not a great start. Now, for years, there was next to nothing about this project until very, very recently. Entitled Tron Ares, it's set to star Jared Leto, and after years stuck in development hell during the Hollywood strikes, it's finally set for fall release next year. While there's no trailer yet, one thing's confirmed. Classic Tron actors like Jeff Bridges and Olivia Wilde aren't on the cast list yet. This might disappoint some fans, but there's always a chance they could be announced later. Ares centers around, well, Ares, a highly advanced program venturing from the digital realm into our worlds on a critical mission, marking humanity's first encounter with a true AI being. It's an interesting concept, and with production finally underway, things are looking promising. Let's just cross our fingers and hope that it avoids the pitfalls of past franchise revivals and delivers a worthy successor. So that brings us to the current day. Tron's journey through film, TV, and other media has been a roller coaster of innovation and missed opportunities, but despite that, it's had an enormous impact on popular culture and specifically sci-fi in general. You could make a very strong argument that the aesthetics of Tron is up there with the likes of Blade Runner and Star Wars for the popular imagination of sci-fi, and this is for good reason. The themes and ideas in Tron were generations ahead of their time, and the visuals doubly so. With such an incredible legacy, it's great that the series is getting what it deserves with the sequel. Let's just hope it can fill the pretty enormous shoes of its predecessors. So that's all for today, and I'll catch you programs later on the grid. Hey, so this is a last minute edition. It turns out today, just like one day before I'm releasing this video, turns out Jeff Bridges will return to Tron Ares. So that's some really cool news. It's kind of exciting. As of now, no other actors from the previous movies are slated to return, but it's cool that Jeff Bridges is returning, and it'll be interesting to see if they do any of the de-aging stuff, which I really doubt. But yeah, cool stuff. Thanks so much for watching. I really appreciate all the support and help, and a big shout out to my Patreons. If you want to do more to support me, please check out my Patreon on the link below. And as always, if you have any suggestions about what you want me to cover next, just drop a comment. Thanks so much, and I'll see you next time. Bye.